Okay, I'm ready to start painting the petals. But what I want to do is I want to flip this upside down because this image is really long and I want to be able to zoom in so you can really see how I'm going to be painting each petal. All right, so now I'm going to take my three colors, my phthalo blue red shade, not the green shade. The red shade pigment identification number is PB 15, and then there's a semicolon, and then the number 6. The green shade is PB 15-3. So you want to get the blue shade. If you use the green shade, it's going to lean a little bit more to the cool side. It'll have a little bit more yellow in it, where the phthalo blue red shade kind of leans a little bit towards the red, so it's going to make really vibrant and beautiful purples. And that's also why I've picked the Quinacridone Magenta PR122, because it's got a little bit of blue in it, so it tends to lean this way. So the two of them are pretty similar, and they're going to give me nice, beautiful purples. And then, of course, my go-to yellow, the only yellow I use, the Nickle yellow, PY150. All three are very transparent and very staining. So this is one of my common palettes. One of the two blues I use and one of the two reds that I use. Okay, so let's start a little bit in the middle. Here's what I think about all these different techniques about mixing color on your palette versus doing layers over and over again. I do both. It just sometimes one technique fits an area better than the other, but I never fail that every time I start painting, I always mix like a base color, and then I see what I come up with, and then I will end up adding yellow as I need it, red and or blue. So I kind of get the base color, and then as I start painting, the painting tells me what I'm going to need after that point. So let's just take a little bit of that and let's see what we've got. Okay, so we're going to have all kinds of colors in here. There's some more red violet. So now I'm going to take some, let's get a little bit more. And let's see what it looks like. And that looks, other than needing to be, deeper value, that looks about like what I'm seeing around this edge. And then we have some areas that we're seeing this, and then we've got a lot of areas that are purple grays. So how are we going to do that? Okay, so I'm going to take, and I have a lot of blue here because I know I'm going to need a lot of blue. Okay, so that's probably good right there. But to make that darker, we're going to need to pick up a little bit of the Nickle yellow. And if you let it dry like I do, using the same, I have the same palettes. And for those of you that paint with me and are members, you know that I just switch out my palettes for the particular tryout I'm going to be using, the three colors. So what happens sometimes is when the colors dry, because the pigment particle size is so small compared to the opaque colors, you have to kind of agitate it and really stir it. So I'm going to take a little bit, let's just grab some of this color and let's just see what we get. And look at that. Now we've got kind of purplish gray. And if I add a little bit more, now I'm really getting into those gray tones. So what I'm going to be doing is, as I'm painting and I come into an area, I'll decide if I'm going to need more yellow, more red, or more blue. So I'm going to add just a little bit more in the center here. In fact, I'm not even going to mix it all the way. I'm just going to let them kind of blend together. Okay, so I'm going to set this down. All right, so now I have to make a decision about these petals. And one thing I can see that, and it was really hard to see when I was drawing this out, so I'm going to add in, so right there. I forgot to finish drawing this little petal right here. This is where it's kind of flipped over. Okay, so I think I want to start by adding water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right around, and I forgot another line delineating where that petal's kind of turned a little bit, and then it turns again. So it's kind of like a ruffle. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get water on the paper because I'm going to be building some deep dark values, and it's really important that you get those staining colors to really sink in. And I'm going right around that edge too because it kind of connects with all that where it's all turned. Now here's the thing, if you haven't been painting with me long, you have to remember that you've got to get a lot of water on the paper for that first layer, just like what we did in the background. Get that water on there, and the more water that you put on there, oh, I gotta switch to my number 2. I'm gonna go back and forth. So I like to get nice pointy brushes so I can get right close in crevices. To me, it's as important when you're painting that you get the water on as much as adding the color. Because once that water dries and your pigment's dry, you're going to see your edges, and if they're very sloppy, it's not going to look good. So it's really important because we've got the faded background. So I want to make sure that I establish a nice sharp-edged petal. Because that's what's going to help it stand out from the background. Luckily, the petals are darker than the background, so if things look a little bit scraggly, I can come back and I can straighten them out. So the decision I'm making is going to save me using my scrubber brushes and or my engraving tools. And I will definitely be using both. But if I can avoid it, I will. So that's why instead of covering the whole thing, I'm kind of leaving all that upper area out. And you know, it can be a little apprehensive sometimes when you're starting a new painting. That's why I like to start the background first. If I'm going to screw anything up, I want it to be the background. That's an easier fix. Okay, so let's turn it to the side and see how much water we have on there. Plenty. So I'm going to kind of turn it, and you can see that the water is moving across the paper just like when I was doing the background, and it's going to pool a little bit. That's what I want. It's not as serious as a background, but you definitely want that water, plenty of water on the paper so that number 1, it's sinking into the paper and it's going to stay there. And number 2, you need to have enough water on the surface to give you enough working time so that you can look at your image and you can say, oh, okay, I'm going to add a little bit more red here, or I'm going to add a little bit more yellow here. Okay, look at how nice and glossy that is. I can see a little bit of the water pooling. So I'm going to send it back that direction. And because I'm up close now, instead of like I was when I was doing the background, you're just going to have to take my word for it that the water is pooling. Okay, so I'm going to give that a second or two. And I think what I want to do here is I want to come over here and pull some of that yellow off that I was using. One of the reasons is it's easier to dull a color down, and I'm not talking about mud. Mud and dullness. Dullness means unsaturated. So brightness, saturated, dullness, unsaturated. Different from mud. You get mud when you mix opaque colors together. But when you want a really unsaturated color, you're going to add that third color in there. but it's very difficult on paper to bring it back up to saturation when you've added that third color. So I would rather start out with it being just a little bit over bright, like in these grays, if I need to, and then I can just lower the saturation a little bit if I have to by adding any one of the three colors. Okay, so let's see how it looks now. All right, we're pretty good. So I think I can start adding some color. So let's mix this a little bit more. And I think that's too much blue. Let's get in a little bit more of the red in there. And I'm going to want this first layer to be light. Okay, I think that's good. And I'm going to stick with my number 2. I don't want to put too much color on the paper at first. Now that's how I know that my water is sinking into the paper. Do you see how the color is staying where I put it instead of shooting across the paper? Had I have just put the water down and then put the color, it would have just shot everywhere. And this is how you get control, and you can move your color around wherever you want, like this. So I have color loaded in my brush right now. So what happens is, as you touch on the paper, you automatically, the water on the surface, the moisture will start pooling. See how I'm carrying around a little spot of color, right? Wherever I leave it and lift up, that's where it'll stay. So you want to move and push that color wherever you want it. So that just means if you don't want a lot of color in some area that's a little bit lighter, push it off towards the side. So as long as you have your brush on the paper, that color is going to follow you around until you go like that and you lift it up. Okay, I'm going to put a little bit more in the center here, and I'm actually going to get some water. Again, I want this to stay light. And there's a reason for this. It's very easy to get a little bit, to go overboard on where you're putting your colors, how dark, how much value. So you want to start out slow. I shouldn't have pulled that color that far. There's actually a little tiny space in here, but that was actually the sky, but I've lost that, so I'm not gonna worry about it. Okay, see how much working time I have? It's giving me plenty of time to move the colors around. Like, look at this area. As I'm looking at it, I'm going, oh yeah, look at how vibrant that area is. So you know what I'm gonna do? I'm dropping some red, and look at how nicely it's staying right in that area. Once you learn this little, and I hate using the word trick because it's not a trick. It's just learning the process. It's learning the foundations. So this part is really a red violet. And as I come down, see how I'm pushing back that color? I'm pushing it back. See how I put my brush down and push back. That's what you want to do. If you feel like you have too much color in an area, just push it back. Rinse your brush. Add a little tiny bit of water to it and just push it out of the way. I'm going to add a little bit more because I know once I start getting that dark color on there, I don't want to make it too dull. Remember, not muddy, dull. Unsaturated. And then at this point, you can even get a smaller brush if you want and put certain colors in different areas, but I think that this is good for now. So I'm just going to pick up a little bit more on the bluer side. And if you need to, if you feel like you're getting too much water on the paper, just take your brush once you hit the color and touch it, and it will wick that ball of paint off the end. And this, to me, is why I prefer synthetic brushes, because they don't hold as much water. It seems counterintuitive, but when you get to the point where you're putting color on the paper, you're not just putting color, you're putting water. So pretty soon you do that so much that you've oversaturated your paper. And then what will happen is you will get a ring of color around the outer edge. Okay, just going to push it up. I'm just feeling my way around. And that's a really helpful when you're just establishing where you want this color, or if you want it to be bluer, if you want it to be gray. And right now I'm kind of leaving the center alone right there. Just going to pull just a little bit more of that color down. Okay, and now let's see what the paper looks like. See how it's nice and glossy still? Look at how much working time I have on this. I could keep adding more and more color if I want. In fact, I'm going to take a little bit of this blue, and I don't want to get it too close to that red. But one good thing is we don't have any yellow in it yet, so I'm not going to worry about it get dulling down with the addition of the yellow. So I'm going to add a little bit more up in this area. Here's another reason why I think it's important to stick with synthetic brushes, is because as you're moving around and you keep adding color and you're going back and forth, again, you're going to get too much color on there, too much water. So just be very gentle with your brush. Just let it move around on the paper. See, it's pretty dark over in here, so I think I'm actually going to pick up some color. And I didn't explain that very well. What I should have said, since I had already mentioned that in the beginning, is as you start to lose the sheen, and I haven't yet, but if I were to start losing the sheen, because I've been painting a lot, I know that at that point, I want to match the consistency of the paint to the sheen on the water paper. So as that sheen starts disappearing, I want to have less color on my brush. That's a very quick way to getting a blossom on your paper. So I'm just moving that just with the tip of my brush. And because I can still look at it, I'm pretty safe. It's still nice and glossy. But now I want to go ahead and let that dry. I don't want to fuss with it too much at this point. Let's just let these colors settle in. Here's another thing to kind of keep in mind. And this took me a while to figure out. As you're putting color on the paper, you're going, what is going on with the paper? Look at this, it's pilling up, it looks terrible. Don't worry about that, because that's just the cotton fibers. They start filling up with color. So as soon as it starts drying, you're going to see all this laying flat and it's going to smooth out. So I'm going to go ahead and use my hair dryer. That kind of will speed it along. And I'm going to dry this, and then we're going to see how I want to continue. Am I going to want to keep building up each petal, or do I want to go around and do the first layer on each one? So we'll talk about that once I'm done drying. Okay, so you can see how now that it's completely dried and it's flat, it feels the same temperature as the background, which is obviously really dry. So I'm good there. It's really dry. And if you noticed, all the fibers have settled down and it's nice and blended. Okay, so that's just the first layer. We're going to keep building up till we get as dark as we want. I always like to start out a little slow. I don't want to just put just really intense color everywhere, especially because they're staining. I just really need to feel through the whole thing, and just started it, so I don't know exactly how I'm going to be doing each petal. So I thought I'd keep it this direction. So let's zoom in a little bit. Okay, and I'm switching now to my number 2. I don't talk a whole lot about brushes because they're pretty personal. These ones are really cheap. I just use Dick Blick. I'm not shilling for them or anything, but they're a good company and I've never had any problems with them. So I use their silver white brushes. they are very reasonable. And then when I start to lose my point, I just move to another brush. Okay, so let's see here. I'm going to enlarge my petal a little bit. Okay, so I think what I want to do is, there's a lot of detail in there. I'm going to just go ahead and wet everything around that, the petal that's in front. This is the back side of it. And there's actually two parts to this, which makes me really glad I did a nice detailed drawing. It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Okay, so I'm actually going to get a smaller brush. I'm going to get my 0 at this point. And every time, just double check. The smaller areas, when you go in these little tiny areas, you don't have to do exactly what we did here. As an area gets bigger, you want to focus on the water getting sunk into the paper. But this is such a little tiny area. I'm not worried about any colors lifting. They're going to sink in. These are very transparent staining colors. So I'm going to go ahead and just wet this. You can already see my colors are starting to dry a bit. So very light. And that right there is about where that curve ends. Kind of miss doing irises. That when I first started painting, that was all I painted. And as I've branched out into other subject matter, I'm kind of sad. I don't paint them, and I love them. I think they're the most beautiful flower. One thing I've always really loved about them is they're only here for a short time in spring. And they're so fussy that anything can stop them from getting a lot of blooms. Of course, unless it's the ones that are on the side of the roadway that you're not taking gentle care of, those ones will really start growing. Okay, so that's pretty light. So this is one thing that happens when you're building up value. And I'm going to say this again, and I say this all the time. Value is the workhorse, and color gets all the glory. If you really want your paintings to stand out, especially when you're first learning and starting with 3 colors, focus on the value, the lightness and the darkness. It is number 1 importance. Color is next. So as you're building up value, it's even a little bit hard for me to see. So I don't know. You may look at this and go, oh no, did I cover that too much? Not at all. By the time we start getting that darker value around and into the crevices, this part is going to actually start looking lighter. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that. And what else could I work on while I'm waiting for that? I think I could go ahead and do this little area, but here's one thing I'm going to do. I've just noticed, and I am going to do this with just on the dry paper. I want to make sure that these folds look like they're kind of coming in. And because this area is going to be a little dark, I feel like I can just come in here very carefully. And because the background is light, I can go right to the edge. Now, am I worried because I'm going to get a line there? Not at all. Because once I put the next layer on, it'll cover it up. Maybe not in the next layer, but it will. Okay, so then, and see, I wasn't really paying attention to that very, very well. So kind of comes down a little bit. So now I'm just going to blend this out just a little bit. And then by the time I put the color on, we're not even going to see that. In fact, I'm going to fix it. Is that? I got to look at that closely. I can't tell. Is that, I think it's coming down. Okay, so I'm just adding a little bit more. It's really important to me. It may not be important to you, but it's important to me that I like to get the shapes exactly where they are, because then it almost looks like you're looking at the English style of botanical painting. Okay, so I fixed that, and at this point I can go around if I need to and straighten up any lines, but I think I'm pretty good. So the only thing I can see, and I'm going to add just a little bit color right there, just kind of smooth that out a little bit more. Okay, now I think I can go ahead and come in there. I probably need to dry that just a bit. I'm going to start off, and again, I'm going to avoid putting the water, worrying about it being too deep. I'm just going to put some water down. I don't know why I grabbed for color. Okay, let's see, how does this work? Okay, so this is coming down, and I actually think, okay, I see what's going on. So this is part of this back one, and so this part is going behind this edge. Okay, just add a little bit more water, and just a little tiny bit right in that area. Okay, so this time I'm gonna reach over here for my Quin Magenta. Okay, now I'm going to add an edge. Okay, that's it right here. It's a little bit darker. In fact, it kind of almost blends in with that background right there. So I'm just touching it with my brush a little bit so I don't get too hard of an edge. Okay, and then it's going to be gray as it comes out. We're not going to worry about the gray yet. We're just getting in that little edge of red. And then a little bit more. Right here, and a little bit more red. Okay, and then we'll be adding the details. Now, keep in mind that you're always going to have that look of, I don't know, we've talked about this before, like the toddler stage. It just doesn't look right. You feel like that you shouldn't even continue on. And then all of a sudden, you start putting in all of those details, and then it just comes alive. That's my favorite part of a painting. Okay, maybe a little bit more, and then we're going to leave that. And I'm going to kind of leave that for right now. I'll come back on that. And over here, it's great. So I did, see how my edges are? They're not very clean. So what you can do, oops, and I got to watch getting water or color. You can clean it up now, or you can wait till you build the second and third layers. So I think I'll wait. So my edge is a little bit ragged, but I'm okay. I still have to get darker colors in. So I will worry about that as I build my color. Okay, so now I have to decide, where do I want to go? Do I want to keep working on this petal, or do I want to start on another area? And I think that's what I'm leaning towards. So thinking about just establishing all the base colors. Okay, I've got a number 12 brush, the synthetic, and a number 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around and I'm going to put water everywhere except for where the leaves start going, where the stem starts going into where it blossoms and opens. So I'm going to leave all of that and up into here. So I'm going to just try, let's see, I'm going to avoid right there and just get in this area. So I'm going to use my big brush to get the majority of the water on. And this time I want to make sure I've got plenty of water on. I'm just going to put it on very gently. And then when I need to fill in the crevices, okay, so right to there. And then it kind of comes around. I'm going to add water on the stem, but I'm not going to put much color in there because the colors tend to get really warm. So I want to do those separately down all in that area so I don't dull them down too much. Now, you shouldn't worry at this point about if you're not going to be getting enough water on it and that an area is going to dry by the time you get over to the next area. All you have to do is just look at it at an angle and add more water. And just put plenty of water on your paper. I'm going to move this out of the way so I can get all this water on. So I'm just going to kind of turn it here and there. I always want my brush, as I am adding water and color, always to be to the inside. That way you get less ragged edges. Okay, I've got all the water. I've covered every area that I want to paint. And you can tell that I had plenty of time to go around and fix my edges because look at how wet everything is. And if an area starts to look like it's losing your sheen, just add some more water. And then gently, carefully tilt your board back and forth like how we did the background. I decided to leave that little petal for last. I'm going to consider that part of that under area where it's a little bit warmer. So I'm just going to leave that alone. Okay, I can see my colors rolling around and I can see some areas. Always hold your paper at an angle too and carefully look in the light and check to make sure that every square inch is covered. Now, if you've painted this really big, like I have, and you're noticing that your paper is getting like a little mound where you've wet it, next time you do that, start with water in the center first and then build it out along the edges. And that'll help it really sink into the middle. I don't feel like that's going to be a problem. In fact, I'm going to kind of use that to my advantage because if you look at this area, it's pretty light, right? So it's actually going to benefit us to have all that water and color just kind of move outward. It's amazing how you can take your brush and go over the whole thing and you still end up missing an area. Okay, I can see it's still running a bit. Now, because we're doing the bigger area, this is where it counts because you want to have plenty of time to look over an area and say, I need a little bit more blue, or I need a little bit more red, or a little bit of my violet. And this base, everything you do from this point on is going to make every other layer easier because you're not going to have to worry about the color lifting. Everything that we've been painting is going to stay and it's sinking all the way down into the center of the paper. And those pigments are adhering to the fibers. So that's what you want. Okay, so I think I'm going to keep it this direction. Okay, I'm going to pick up my number 4 and I think I'm going to start off. I probably should have done this earlier, but I'm pretty confident that it's going to stay really wet. It is kind of losing its sheen in the center, but I'm just going to pick up a little bit of this color and see how it's not shooting across the paper. That's what I want. And I want this very, very light. So I'm going to stick with my more blue-violet, I guess you could say, is in this area. And now I'm coming back into, we're seeing that really, really red-violet. And then it's kind of light right in here. So I'm going to leave that alone. Maybe a little bit right in that area. And yes, I'm crossing over some of these outer petals, but it still has color in these areas. So as long as you don't put too much color, you don't have to worry about losing your highlights. Okay, it's darker there. Okay, it's a little bit purpled there. And now we're going back to blue violets in there. Now I want purple in there. And I can see that I've still got some of these beautiful red violets over in that area. At this point, I don't worry too much if I'm going to lose some of my highlights, because that is what my scrubber brushes and my engraving pen, that's where those are going to come in handy. Let's put a little bit more right in this area. Okay, I'm going to pick up more red for right in this area, and I'm going to try to push it up more. Now back to kind of dark right in this area. And if you look at my paper, see how it's still nice and glossy? There's a little bit of a bow right there. But look at how my colors are starting to nicely blend. So I'm just picking up my board and I'm moving it around. And all those colors, and I have some water on the outside there. This may or may not work, but I'm just going to lift a little bit of that. Sometimes the water will tend to want to travel right to that area. Okay, so now we're getting back into these bluer areas. So right in here, got these bluer areas. I've got more red here and lots of red in this area. But remember, light colors. Okay. That area was just a little bit more purple than it was red, but that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, be very careful how dark you make it. We're just putting that first layer on. And then again, you can use your brush to help move the colors around. Okay, I'm going to put my brush down and I'm going to zoom out a little bit. See how the painting is rolling right to the top. That means I've got plenty of water. See how nice and glossy it is? It is starting to lose it in the center. Actually, I'm going to take my number 2 and I'm going to pull this down with just some water on my brush. Right down the center. And what I'm looking at is my dividing lines. So I just don't want to go any farther than that. So that's where all the light is and more of the kind of unsaturated, what are they? It's almost kind of like a burnt sienna under there that tends to lean towards yellow, but it's really light. Okay, so I think I'm okay now. I'm going to go ahead and dry it, and then we're going to come back and I'm going to add color into this part of the flower. I should have mentioned this before I started putting color everywhere. So I kind of went around this, and the reason they're called a bearded iris is because that's their little beards right there. It's where the pollen, where the bees come and pick up the pollen. I figured it's not going to be a big deal because I have these engraving pens and I have all these nifty little tips. So I can, when I go to do those, I can just pick up a tiny little tip, probably one like this. It's very, very tiny on the end, and I can just pull out some of those highlights. Why I didn't do it on the other one, I don't know, but I'll work that out in a bit. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get my, what am I going to use? My number 4. And the same thing, that's the beard. So this time I'm just going to kind of leave that area alone. And I'm also going to try to stay along and away from the edge right there where it's very light. And I'm also avoiding that little center there. And again, if you're thinking it's just looking horrible, don't stress. As we move on and as we start building values and using the finer brushes to go around and clean up edges, it's going to work out. Okay, so I'm going to give that just a second, adding a little bit more water. You can see how nice and shiny it is. Again, and I'm going to repeat myself a lot over this. Make sure you have plenty of water and make sure every square inch is covered. Okay, I'm going to pick up a little bit of the purple. And I'm using my zero brush to put that color on. And you can see my color staying right where I'm putting it. I'm going to pull it down into the corner there. And as I paint, I'm going to start using smaller and smaller brushes as I start building those darker values to get into little fine areas. It kind of goes against conventional wisdom, but it works for me. Okay, I'm going to use a little bit more of this, my purple. And if it's starting to dry, just make sure you agitate it really well. So I'm just moving the color around very carefully and barely touching the paper. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry, and then now we're going to go into each section and area of the petals. Okay, before I start adding my color, what I need to do is I need to go around and clean up my edges because they are still a little ragged. And when you think about it, I was paying attention. I still have ragged edges. Okay, so I am going to use one of my little Rosemary and Company eradicators, scrubber brush. That they just call it eradicator. But it's really thin and flat, and the hairs are really gentle. They're firm but gentle. So I've kind of moved my palette out of the way, and this way I can turn. I have water on my brush. Very gently, I'm going to smooth out those edges. And this is going to save me a lot of work later on. And then you just keep lifting up the color and see how much smoother that already is. And let's see here. Okay, so I'm just going to keep going around and doing this. I'm not going to show you the whole, there's no reason to go around and show you every little part that I'm gently scrubbing, but I have switched from, actually I'm going to switch back and forth. This is a Dick Blick Wonder White scrubber brush, and this one's modified. And they come in 3 sizes. They come in a set. I have tried probably 30 different scrubber brushes, and these Wonder White are the best. That's how if you keep following me or if you're a member on my website, you know that I use these to go around and pick up highlights in my backgrounds, especially if it's a lot of bokeh, circles, and different colors. So, and this one I modified. You can tell I've had it for a long, long time. I've had to glue it back in to the base, but I actually wrapped tape and I cut it on both sides so that it gave me a little dot. So I'm going to keep switching back and forth between the two. One thing I want to mention is if you're getting scrubber brushes, and you really should have a set, they're your best friend. We all know how hard it is to keep whites, and I have people say, well, why not just save your whites? Well, I'm an experienced painter, and I sometimes have trouble with that. So instead of having a painting that just looks really ragged, you have to have, and it doesn't look like it now, but it's going to count in a little while. As soon as I start building up those dark values, you've got to have a nice, clean, sharp edge. So I'm just very gently switching back and forth between the two. And you may be looking at it and thinking, well, what does it matter if it's going to have dark color on some of those areas? Well, because there's going to be value within those dark areas, and I don't want to have to try to go over and scrub it out later and disturb my darker values. And see right there how I can see a little bit color that got out of my foreground. So I'm just lifting it up a little bit. And this is a hard concept to understand, but when you are doing a foreground and you want that out of focus background, you are trying to do two things. Keep it very sharp, but not make it look like it's cut out. And that's a hard concept to kind of visualize. But if you do this and you pay attention to keeping your edges nice and sharp, yet not looking cut out, and you're not going to really understand what I'm talking about until I really get going, or you've watched some of my other tutorials. So see how the edge is kind of disappearing now, and it's looking a little bit cleaner? So that's what you want. You just want to go around, clean up all those edges. This will also help you if you have too much water in your background. So let's say you were working on your background, you had too much water, and now you have this dark outline of color around everything. Then you can just take one of these flat brushes, especially the Rosemary and Company, they're great. And then you just very lightly brush along the top. That'll help get rid of those dark edges of the background. And when you're scrubbing out, I've got to think of a better word to say than scrubbing, because that's not what you're doing. You're just almost tickling the surface of the paper. Your brush is almost barely touching the surface. If you have a tight grip and you're mashing down, you're gonna disturb the paper fibers. So be very careful about that. Light, gentle, swirling motions. Okay, you can really see how my little scrubber has really softened all the edges. So now what I want to do is one last thing before I really get into these is if this has happened to you, if you have some areas where you didn't pay attention to your cover, whatever it is, cling wrap or the press and seal or the masking fluid, and it leaves a little area, I'm just going to show you really quickly how to do this, and be careful so that you can, when you come to this, you don't have to go, oh no, how am I going to fix this little area? So what you want to do is put some water over it, give it a second to sink in, and then you want to take your scrubber brush and very lightly touch that color. Okay, so you can see that there's nothing on there, and I'm going to press down, and you can see how it's picked up a little bit of the color. Now, if you pay attention, you won't have to fix this. It's a little bit more up. Some people like to wait till they get to that point down there, but it's distracting to me. See, I'm just a little bit more, just a little bit at a time. I keep picking up that color. Now, these Rosemary and Company don't scrub really hard, so it's hard to really get any significant amount of color up. So I'm going to switch over to my Dick Blick brushes. I'm just going to circulate a little bit and very carefully. I'm putting a little bit more pressure on my brush, and then I'm going to show you how to fix it if you get any amount of paper lifting. And I got to tell you, I don't know how this works on any other brands other than Fabriano and Arches. So you just have to test it on something. But see, I pretty much got it all out. And as I look in that area, of course, with my luck, that's going to be right where there's a highlight. And there is. There is. But you know what? I can wait and I can pull more of that out as I move into that area. But I've pretty much got it all lifted. And then when it dries, so first of all, make sure you do this on dry paper. Let it sink in a little bit and then start picking up the color. Then let it completely dry, and then you can take a plastic spoon. Don't use metal because it's going to leave a mark on your paper. So just use a plastic spoon, put your finger in the center, and just burnish the paper back down. Trust me, I've done this a lot, and I've had a lot of paintings I've had to save, and that's going to work. And then same thing over here. Just had a couple more. I think I've got one little dark spot there. And I can see a couple more places, but these are going to be dark enough that I'm not going to have to worry about it. Okay, everything's really dry, and I've picked an area that I'm going to start. So I'm going to do these purple areas right in here and in here, and then I'll go on to the next lesson. I tried to keep it around an hour. So what I did was I had to go back in and kind of redraw that. I am going to be fanatical about these details. So first thing I'm going to do, and I'm just going to do this on the dry paper. So my color, I started out, it's a little dark. It's dark value. In fact, let's zoom in just a little bit more. And I'm going to keep adding water. And no, I'm not going to be wetting the paper. If an area is big enough and it warrants it, then I'll probably, I'll go back and forth between wet and dry. Okay, now is where, at least to me, the fun starts. So I'm going to come over here and pick up a little bit of blue, and I'm going to put it right in here. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind with the Phthalo blues is, oh boy, they are super strong. See, I'm just adding that to the magenta, and I'm going to go back in, and you will get some unbelievably fantastic purples, violet, whichever you want to call it. I think better than the tubes. And this way, my painting, I'm going to have complete harmony. And it's hard to see this, but this goes all the way up and into this area. So I'm just going to take a wet brush and I'm just going to kind of soften that, although I really don't need to. It's going to end up being so dark. Doing all the little tiny details, that is my favorite part. Okay, a little bit more water. I'm so excited about this. I'm going to get a little bit darker right in that little crevice there. And it helps to have a nice, sharp, tiny brush. And this one is my 0. Let's tone it down just a little bit. Not tone it down, that was the wrong word. Let's get some little bit more color variation. Now, this is going to dry lighter. Let me clean up the edges. To me, this is where the magic happens, when you are really paying attention to what's going on along those frilly edges. Let's get a little bit more red. Let's get it in a thicker area. Let's pull this down so it's out of the glare. Okay, let's leave that alone. And now let's come up into this area. Now this is a bigger area, so I'm going to keep with my number 2 here. And I've got a little color on my brush, but that's okay because that's just helping you to see. I'm just going to go ahead and add just a little bit of color so you can see where I'm placing my water. So there's a little dividing line right there where this edge just curls around. And off camera, I probably spent about 10-15 minutes getting those ruffles exactly the way I wanted them. Okay, so it's got a nice sheen on there. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to pick up some of the red. And then I'm going to switch back to my middle color here. And I'm going to go back to some of the red. Just moving the color around with my brush. And if you're really looking at the image, you can see that there's like little veins in there. So I don't want to leave those out. So I'm not going to make it too dark because I want to get those veins in. And I want to be able to see them. Okay, we're going to let that dry. And I think I'm going to go ahead and get this little ripple that's under here. Now, I am going to add water because I want there to be some division within the ripple. And yep, I'm getting very detailed. So this is going to be a long tutorial. You're going to see everything I do. Okay, so I'm going to come over here. I'm going to find a little area that I like. And let's see. Nope, I'm going to get a smaller brush. I'm going to go with my 5/0. Okay. And I've just rinsed my brush. I'm going to pick up a little bit of color. Okay, now remember, that's an area that I scrubbed out. And you don't see any color moving into the background because it's disturbed. That's because I didn't over scrub. Okay, back to some more of this. A little bit darker. Maybe I'll grab a little bit. This is my favorite part, is when I look around and I can see all these different colors I've created. So now I'm going to go to a dark, and this is where I'm going to be fixing the edge. See, I was able to take and point that just a little bit. But I'm able to do that because I took the time to clean out those edges. I think I'm going to be needing already to start building, figuring out some of my grays. Okay, so far so good. And then we've got a little bit of a dark area here, but I think I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to go ahead and stop here for this lesson, but this is a good starting point. I can already see that this is going to need to be much darker, but it's getting darker, and you can see that I've got some bluish violets and some reddish violets, and that's what you want. If you go too heavy in the dark values, all at once, then they just look really flat. So I'm going to keep building these up in the next lesson.